Today I want to share with you the story of how a terrible fishing trip transformed into an amazing experience. We were fishing for carp in December with cold temperatures. The conditions for underwater filming were rough. It was cold, there wasn't much daylight, and the carp showed no interest in the bait. Just when we almost had given up hope, we repeatedly saw a large pike swimming by while studying the underwater content. We even found a second pike hiding in the branches. Perhaps this was the perfect moment to study the behavior of pikes in winter. For this we used the head of a mackerel attached to a treble hook in combination with a fixed lead system. After reviewing the footage, it became immediately clear that this was a terribly poor technique. The approach, initially thought to be clever, turned out to be ineffective. There was no reaction from the pike, but only some perch came to take a look. These curious fish showed some interest, circling around the bait, but didn't attempt to actually eat the bait. We decided to adapt. This time we wanted to study how the pike would react if we offered a roach on the bottom and at the same time a floating mackerel. It quickly became clear that these different methods of bait presentations made a tremendous difference. Whereas in the first test with a fish head, no pike had appeared in front of the camera for several hours. Now, just within minutes, the first pike showed interest in the bait. This immediate response marked a stark contrast to our initial attempts. The attention was immediately directed towards the floating bait, and after a short observation, the pike decided to take a bite without hesitation. However, the bait was immediately released. The pike remained interested and began to observe the bait while it continued to circle around it. The bait on the bottom seemed to go unnoticed. After a few more passes, the pike swam away, but not much later a new pike arrived. Initially I thought it was the same one, but by looking closely to the scales, it became clear that it was a different pike. After a brief observation and some blows at the bait, the pike made contact for the first time. It appears to be more about feeling and testing than actually wanting to consume the bait. In the background, a second pike suddenly appears. The pike showed the exact same reaction as the other pike did a few moments before. This intriguing behavior prompted us to think. In the next test we want to offer floating bait again, but in smaller pieces. Perhaps this will enable the pike to take the bait into its mouth more quickly. Now both pikes start swimming circles around the bait again. This behavior indicates interest from both predators. Their circling can be seen as cautious yet curious investigation. They assess the situation and decide on the best course of action. One of the pike resumes blowing against the bait, engaging in a tactical assessment, while the second one positions itself above the first pike. As they swim away, you can clearly see the difference in size. After some intense staring, the bigger pike makes another attempt to grab the bait. After a few attempts, the pike managed for the first time to properly get the bait in its mouth. However, suddenly the bait is expelled. Likely the pike felt too much resistance from the lead and thus became distrustful of it. Unfortunately, the hook didn't manage to secure itself in the mouth, and so the pike was not hooked. Despite the setback, the pike doesn't give up and begins a new attempt. The persistent behavior demonstrates the pike's determination. After another unsuccessful attempt, they start to swim in circles again. The same behavior keeps repeating itself. Then something new happens. Suddenly a crayfish decides to join the party, and this results in the first interest for the bottom bait. After reviewing the footage, it became clear that continuing with floating but smaller bait was necessary. By adjusting the bait size, the aim is to make it more manageable and tempting for the pike, potentially increasing the success rate of captures. Again, within minutes, 2 pike came to check out the new bait. This led to a new intense staring battle between the pikes and the bait. It is noticeable that the pikes are together again and making physical contact with each other. I actually expected pikes to lead more solitary lives in winter. Just like what we expected to happen. It starts swimming with the bait and kept dragging the lead with him. As we zoom in, we see that the hook is still outside of the mouth. Unfortunately, this didn't result in a hooked fish, but we are getting closer. Because we have an hour of daylight left, we are going to try it again with the same technique. This time just 1 pike, but also within a few minutes. The pike shows a lot of interest in the camera. It even starts to blow against it. This pike seemed to be more cautious, mostly circling around the bait. Occasionally blowing or staring, but unfortunately it's getting darker before anything significant happens. On the final day, we had one last chance for success before we had to leave. Hopefully we can wrap up this session with a success story. We're using the same technique as yesterday and are pretty convinced in a good result. The bait is presented for the camera, ready for action. Then suddenly, within a few minutes, a pike approaches the bait without any hesitation. A quick blow and then it grabs the bait and slides it deeper in its mouth while staying on the same spot. When the bait is deep enough in its mouth, it swims away and gets hooked. Alright, so there we have it. I am a carp angler, but we like to fish on predators as well. And we caught this beautiful pike. It is 83 centimeters. And it was in front of the underwater camera. The angle wasn't that great, but still, it was a really good take. I have to go into the boat to grab it. And actually, it's the first time that we tried this technique. We have fished quite a few times with that bait, but they were only on the bottom. But this time we placed something inside of the dead bait and it was floating like a pop-up. And it worked out pretty well. To be honest, it worked out pretty well.
Doesn't want to go, right?
Oh, he likes us. New PB, 26.2 kilograms. Hell yeah. Happy days. I'm over the moon.